The sterile scent of the hospital room still clung to my clothes, a phantom reminder of the whispered worries and beeping machines. My body was on the mend, but my mind was a battlefield. He drained everything, I thought, the words a bitter echo in the quiet apartment. I pictured the sleek, predatory smile of Victor, his assurances of loyalty as hollow as a drum. He must have thought he was so clever, meticulously siphoning off every last cent, every investment, every piece of what I had painstakingly built. He couldn't possibly know, that while he was orchestrating my financial ruin, I was orchestrating his. The first tremor of suspicion had hit me months ago, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the facade of his charming efficiency. A misplaced invoice, a mumbled excuse about a transfer delay. Nothing concrete, just a gut feeling that something was off. Then came the accident. A sudden, dizzying spell, a fall down the stairs that landed me in a hospital bed, a convenient absence for Victor to execute his grand finale. He was so confident, so utterly convinced of his untouchable genius. But even from my hospital bed, hazy with painkillers and fear, my mind was sharp. The details of those fake contracts played on a loop in my head. The inflated figures, the shell companies, the phantom services. It all clicked into place with chilling clarity. And so, with a trembling hand, I had made the call. Not to the police, not to a lawyer, but to the one entity that Victor truly feared. The tax authorities. I can still taste the metallic tang of adrenaline as I recounted the elaborate web of deceit, providing just enough information to pique their interest, to set the gears in motion. I knew it would be a slow burn, a meticulous unraveling, but I also knew it was inevitable. He was so busy celebrating his perceived victory. He had no idea the trap was already sprung. And now, here I was, back in my apartment, surveying the wreckage of my financial life, but with a quiet, burning satisfaction. He had emptied my accounts, but he had also sealed his own fate. The days that followed were a peculiar blend of quiet recovery and simmering anticipation. I walked through my apartment, a ghost in my own home, the silence amplified by the sudden emptiness of my bank accounts. Every now and then my phone would buzz, a text from Victor. His words dripping with feigned concern. "So glad you're home, dear. Let me know if you need anything at all." Each message was a fresh insult, a reminder of his audacious betrayal. I'd simply reply with a curt "thank you," my fingers itching to type something far more satisfying. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every smile, every seemingly innocuous conversation. It was like sifting through a crime scene, looking for overlooked clues. The fake contracts, I realized, were more than just a means to steal. They were his signature, his twisted artwork. The precision with which he'd woven the illusion, the audacity of his lies, it was almost impressive in a horrifying way. He'd studied me, my habits, my trust, and then he'd dismantled it all with surgical precision. My recovery was slow, not just physically but emotionally. The betrayal stung deeper than any bruise. But with each day, a new resolve hardened within me. This wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about justice, about stripping away his carefully constructed facade. I imagined the scene when the tax authorities finally came knocking. The polite inquiries, the slow dawning of realization on his face, the gradual unraveling of his perfect world. He prided himself on being untouchable, on being smarter than everyone else. That belief, I knew, was about to be shattered. And I, the supposed victim, would be watching from the shadows, a quiet architect of his downfall. The waiting was the hardest part, a taut string pulled to its breaking point, but I knew with every fiber of my being that the snap would be worth it. The first sign that my quiet machinations were bearing fruit wasn't a phone call or a formal letter. It was a subtle shift in Victor's demeanor. His texts, once feigning warmth, became sporadic, tinged with an uncharacteristic urgency. "Everything all right on your end?" he'd type, followed by an almost immediate, "just checking in." The smooth, confident veneer he usually wore seemed to be cracking, revealing glimpses of anxiety beneath. He was a predator sensing the distant rumble of thunder. I imagined him, alone in his opulent office, poring over documents, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. Was he going through old invoices, trying to find a flaw in his own meticulous fraud? Was he replaying conversations, wondering when he'd slipped up? The thought sent a jolt of grim satisfaction through me. The hunter was becoming the hunted, and he didn't even know who held the rifle. My days were now punctuated by quiet observation. I found myself lingering by the window, watching the street, half expecting to see a nondescript sedan, or perhaps a stern-faced individual in a dark suit. The anticipation was a living thing inside me, a constant hum beneath the surface of my calm exterior. It was a strange sort of power, knowing that his downfall was silently, inexorably approaching, and that I was the unseen hand guiding its trajectory. He had drained my accounts, yes, but in doing so, he had unwittingly empowered me with a new kind of currency, information precise and deadly, and I was ready to spend it all. The true unraveling began subtly, like a hairline crack appearing in a perfectly polished mirror. Victor stopped calling altogether. His once frequent, almost badgering texts ceased. The silence was louder than any accusation, a vacuum where his manufactured concern used to be. I imagined him huddled in his lavish office, the phone ringing unanswered, his gaze fixed on a spreadsheet, desperately trying to untangle the knots he'd so confidently tied. He was feeling the squeeze, that much was certain. Then came the rumors, whispers carried on the wind of the business community. Murmurings about delayed payments from companies he supposedly worked with, hushed questions about the legitimacy of some of his larger projects. I heard snippets from old acquaintances, disguised as casual inquiries about my health. Heard Victor's been under some stress lately. They'd venture, their voices laced with an almost voyeuristic curiosity. I'd simply nod, feigning ignorance, a polite smile masking the deep satisfaction bubbling within me. He was beginning to realize the walls were closing in, but he still couldn't pinpoint the architect of his misfortune. That was the beauty of it. He was reacting to an unseen force, a consequence he hadn't accounted for. The tax authorities, in their methodical, quiet way, were tightening the net. Each piece of information I'd provided, each meticulously detailed lie I'd exposed, was a thread being pulled, slowly but surely, unraveling his meticulously woven tapestry of deceit. He was a spider caught in his own web, and I, the fly he'd tried to ensnare, was now watching him struggle. The final act of Victor's downfall wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, almost anticlimactic whisper. It started with an article in the local business journal, tucked away on an inside page, reporting on a formal inquiry into several companies with questionable financial practices. No names were mentioned, but the details, specific enough for those in the know, pointed directly at him. His carefully constructed facade was not just cracking, it was crumbling under the weight of an invisible, relentless pressure. Then came the news that his assets were being frozen. Not just his business accounts but his personal ones too. The luxury cars, the sprawling estate, the high-end art collection. All suddenly beyond his reach. He was being systematically stripped of everything he had used to define himself, to project an image of success and power. The silence from him was absolute now, a stark contrast to his earlier attempts at maintaining appearances. He was no longer trying to contact me, no longer sending those hollow, feigned messages of concern. He was gone, absorbed by the very system he thought he'd outsmarted. My own life, though still reeling from the financial devastation, began to find a new rhythm. The initial shock had given way to a quiet determination. I was rebuilding piece by painstaking piece, not just my finances but my trust, my sense of security. And in the quiet moments, I allowed myself to savor the undeniable truth. He had drained everything, but he hadn't known I had already reported his fake contracts to the tax authorities. His grand scheme, designed to ruin me, had instead been the catalyst for his own spectacular, self-inflicted demise. The taste of vindication was bittersweet, but undeniably potent. The call came on a Tuesday, an unfamiliar number. My heart hammered against my ribs, a primal fear momentarily eclipsing the calm I'd painstakingly cultivated. I answered, a cautious hello on my tongue. The voice on the other end was rough, familiar, yet utterly broken. It was Victor. "I know it was you," he rasped, his voice devoid of its usual arrogant smoothness. There was no anger, only a chilling hollowness, a complete absence of the bravado that had once defined him. "The authorities. They showed me everything. The reports. The dates." I said nothing, gripping the phone tightly, my knuckles white. There was a perverse satisfaction in hearing the collapse in his voice, the realization of his utter undoing. He continued, almost to himself, as if speaking into a void. I thought I was untouchable. You were in the hospital, for God's sake. Who would have thought?" He paused, a ragged breath catching in his throat. I imagined him in some drab, sterile room, stripped of his suits and his pretense, reduced to just a man facing the consequences of his greed. "You played me," he finally whispered, the words laced with a strange, almost childlike wonder, as if he were encountering a concept entirely alien to him. "You played me better than I ever played anyone." A long silence stretched between us, filled only with the faint static of the connection. I felt no triumph, no surge of overwhelming victory, just a profound sense of closure, tinged with the lingering pain of what he had done. He had taken so much, but he had also, inadvertently, given me back something invaluable. My strength, my resilience, and the undeniable proof that even in the darkest moments, I was capable of fighting back. Finally I spoke, my voice calm and steady, devoid of any emotion. "You drained everything, Victor. But you didn't know I'd already reported your fake contracts to the tax authorities." The line went dead. The click of the phone line severing was the true end, more definitive than any legal document or frozen asset. I sat there for a long moment, the silent receiver pressed to my ear, a strange mix of emptiness and quiet triumph washing over me. Victor was gone, not just from my life, but from the world he had so meticulously built for himself. His empire, constructed on a foundation of lies, had finally crumbled. In the weeks and months that followed, life slowly, painfully, began to reassemble itself. The financial recovery was a slow climb, marked by meticulous budgeting and the support of a few true friends who had stood by me. But more importantly, my spirit began to heal. The gnawing fear, the sense of violation, slowly receded, replaced by a quiet strength. I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize the subtle red flags I had once overlooked. The scars remained, of course. A lingering wariness, a deeper appreciation for the simple honesty of a handshake. But those scars were also a testament to my resilience. Victor had tried to break me, to drain me of everything I held dear. He had succeeded in taking my money, but in doing so, he had inadvertently forged a stronger, more discerning version of myself. I was no longer the naive individual he had preyed upon. I was a survivor, and I carried the quiet knowledge that, in the end, I had won. The game was over, and the house of cards he built had finally, irrevocably fallen.